Myers, and I'm president of Friends of the Library this year. And I want to welcome you all to the very first lecture in the Walter Durham Lecture Series. Hope you will find the other three just as interesting. Okay, so we're here to hear. If you want to look around a little bit, this is a fantastic place. You would not believe the things that go on in here and how many programs they have. So, Mr. Bishop. This is Michael Bishop. He grew up in Alabama, but he went to Freed-Hardeman, and then he went to Knoxville, UT, and he happened to be nosing around in a
somebody else's business.
Yeah, so in 1997 and found this transcript of this murder in 1964. So he realized he might have a little touchy system, so he continued to sneak around and get all the information he could, working on it. How many years? 20 years. Getting his information for this. So he is, and we know the title of the book, and many of you brought it with you, hoping to get it signed, maybe? Okay. Okay, and the Washington Post review of the book described it this way. Described Michael Bishop this way: determined to right a wrong that everyone else had looked away from, Michael Bishop became a one-man innocence commission. So, there he is.
So thank you for having me here. We have any nurses in this audience? Okay, one, good. My heartbeat's running about 200. I do this a lot, but it's always an honor to be in a library. I grew up going to libraries. Had a library card, I think in the first grade, because I was reading real soon. So a couple things I promised you. So again, thanks to Kay, Scott, and everyone for having me here. Promise you a couple of things. You're going to learn a lot more than is in the book. I will answer any questions you have except for the ones I don't want to answer. You'll find out I have a dry sense of humor. Hopefully the jokes come through. So let me ask, can you hear me okay? Yes. Volume's good? Okay. So I think every good presentation should probably start with a pop quiz. But before I get there, let me say I hope you will come back the next 3 Monday nights, because the joy of going first is I don't have to follow the real speakers that are coming. So that's good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to walk you through some images. I'll talk, I'll move around. This might take 30 minutes, but after that, no kidding, I'll answer questions. We'll save some time at the end. I can sign books. I usually ask if anybody's holding a subpoena. If you do, if you just hold those to the end. So let's start with 1963, if you can see what I'm doing here. So here's the question. On the screen, I don't know if you can see this. So this is the prices of some items in 1963, and let me know if I'm blocking your view. So think about your answers to what these might be. And here's the answers that are there. I remember pumping gas, helping my dad fill up the car as a kid. I was probably 6 or 7, and I remember paying 23 cents a gallon, 27 cents a gallon, and I don't think those are coming back. But anyway, take a close look at this one too. The typical income, $4,500. I mean, that's a lot of money in 1963. So what was happening in Nashville in 1963? What was happening in Nashville in 63 really was dependent on what was going on in Nashville in 62, because there was a referendum on the books, and that was to consolidate Nashville City, Davidson County. It wasn't one absorbing the other. It was a true consolidation, and it was the first and largest of its kind. The really brilliant men and women who helped pull this off, that same model has been used almost 20 times since then in places you've heard of, like Los Angeles City, County of Los Angeles. They used this model. So one of the promises, if you lived in these suburban areas, if you lived, I mean, basically, I don't know if Hendersonville might have been one, but let's say you lived in the Creve Hall area or Belmead. If you would vote for consolidation, then you would have fire protection within 5 minutes of your home. You'd have the police available within 5 minutes of your home. Better sewer, water, infrastructure, all these things were there. So people did vote it in, and it did pass, and no kidding, stroke of midnight. April Fool's Day 1963, Metro was formed. And it became the first Metro government in the U.S. This man, Clifton Beverly Briley, was the visionary for this Metro experiment, and that's probably a good way to describe it. So at the stroke of midnight, the man who had been one of the county executives became the first mayor. He was truly brilliant. 16 years old, he's out of high school. By 18, he has passed the bar. And meaning, this was back in the day when you didn't take 3 years of law school. 4 years of college, 3 years of law school. If you could pass the bar exam, you were an attorney. He did that at age 18. He did that by going to Cumberland Law School in Lebanon. And I've said this some other times, I didn't know you could sell a law school. But Cumberland Law School actually got sold, and it now exists at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. So very, very well-known law school. Is also one of the top schools when it came to trial law. I did mark through the Vanderbilt University graduate because, surprisingly, you actually have to attend and graduate. He did neither. Neither. I don't care what you see on Wikipedia sites, whatever. He did neither of these things. So this is Clifton David Briley, right? This is the grandson of Clifton Beverly Briley, current Metro Nashville mayor. This photograph, this is the old mayor on this side, cigarette in the mouth. They're taking down the Nashville city signs because they're no longer needed. This, they're showing off the Metro stickers that are going on the police cars. But the importance of this slide is the man closest to me. That's Hubert Kemp. So when Metro was formed, an administrative officer became the first chief of police in Metro Nashville. I've had people tell me some would say, I don't even remember anything about the Paula Herring murder. But I'll also quickly remind them, there sure were a lot of other things that would have gotten your attention. In the summer of 1963, President Kennedy was at Vanderbilt in May doing the commencement address, talking about TVA and what a wonderful thing TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, was doing in the South. The Medgar Evers, you remember this is the civil rights activist in Jackson, Mississippi. That shooting later on became a pretty famous movie. I think was it, actually I'll have to think about the title. I was about to say Mississippi Burning, but that's the 1964, the three guys who were the civil rights workers. Mississippi Burning was the movie spawned from that. Anyway, John Overton High School, first graduating class, and I mean, they had gone 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and the first senior class happened in June of '63, and then Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech in Washington of August. So a lot of things were going on. Some other things that were happening just in pop culture. Do you know these shows? So if you can't see this, this is The Outer Limits, The Fugitive, Patty Duke, Petticoat Junction. I'm almost certain all four of these can be found on reruns on TV Land and some of these others. So I'm going to move to 1964. You recognize these guys, right? I put a date. I don't know if you can see it. There's February 9th on this side, February 23rd on my closest side. That represents, so the Beatles had come to America, their first trip, touring America, and they were on the Ed Sullivan Show. The Ed Sullivan Show was on Sunday night. So they filmed two segments, one live, one taped. And on February 9th, the live one was shown. On February 23rd, the taped one was shown. And the Beatles actually left Nashville, they left, I think it was Miami, on February 22nd, kind of an important day in this story, and they were on their way back to London. So here's the question, how many channels could you watch on TV back in the day? I see 3. Everybody knows the 3. Wow, that's right. There's your 3. Do you remember some of these shows? Well, you're not old enough to remember some of these shows. See the letter C right here? That stands for color. That was the only program in color on TV on Saturday night, February 1964. Everything else is black and white. Other forms of entertainment. I don't know if you'll recognize these guys or not. Anybody ever heard of the Allman Brothers? Yeah, so Greg and Dwayne Allman were born in Nashville, Tennessee. They lived in Nashville. They went to school at Castle Heights Military Academy in Lebanon, and they loved going. They did not love going to Castle Heights. They talked their mother into leaving. She took the little family to Daytona Beach, and that's where they basically continued some of their career. They would come back in the South playing dances and other places, and they did so under the name of the Allman Joys. So if you've read the book, you know all his next door neighbor at times was dating Greg Allman. So the world's biggest small town, right? Or America's biggest small town. You recognize this photograph, right? So this is the Mother Church, the Ryman Auditorium. This is actually from the 60s era. So you can see that. I'm going to jump back over here. And then this is another form of entertainment. Recognize Printer's Alley, right? Do you recognize that this is a raid? Because these are police cars lined up. That's what this is. So how many people have spent a lot of time in Printer's Alley? Nobody's been there. I asked that at Vanderbilt. Wait, we got one. I made the mistake of asking something about that at Vanderbilt Nursing Leadership Retreat. They asked me to speak to, a couple of hands go up, they want to talk about it, so I'm not doing that. So this is back in the day when anything you wanted to do in Printer's Alley, you could find a way to do it. And I'm not stretching the truth. Anything you could think of, you could do it. Illegal gambling, illegal drinking, liquor by the drink, whatever. And there's a lot of other more whatevers you could do. This fellow, R stands for Riddle, no kidding. Jimmy Hoffa was a frequent flyer in Printer's Alley. You may remember that at the time of the Paula Herring murder, Jimmy Hoffa was on trial in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and federal prosecutors were after him there for having tampered with a previous trial that took place in Nashville. So they moved the trial out of town, hoping not to have any more shenanigans with Hoffa. This is another frequent flyer out of Printer's Alley through the years. This is the mobster Little Mickey Cohen. Anybody ever seen the movie L.A. Confidential? That's Mickey Cohen. I read the book by James Ellroy. That's Mickey Cohen. The reason I put this here, one of the mob hits in Los Angeles, they discovered that the gun that was used, a .38 caliber revolver, turned out to have come from a Nashville police sergeant who just happened to be involved in a lot of entertaining activities in his squad car. The guy's name was, anybody in here related to Morgan Smith, former Nashville Metro Police Sergeant? No hands are going up. Okay, so Morgan Smith had a pretty cool way to make a living. He worked as a Nashville Police Sergeant, and then he also ran a prostitution business out of his squad car. So if you needed a hooker delivered to your hotel, Morgan Smith would drop him off. He was well known for running that particular business. But he was also one of the guys who ends up being arrested. Federal indictments came through a few days after the Paula Herring murder. Sheriff Leslie Jett, Morgan Smith, some other of the leadership got caught in a corruption sting. And the way it used to work in Nashville, you would run for election claiming you were going to clean everything up. But as soon as you got elected, then you started making money until the next election when you claimed you're going to clean everything up. So Nashville did get noted Life magazine, the most corrupt city in America, in part because it was kind of an ironic situation. The buckle of the Bible Belt, right? Church on every corner, but yet the most corrupt city in America. So remember the Metro promise. Vote for Metro and we'll make sure you have what you need. So there was a problem with that 5-minute promise, and the problem turns out to be at the stroke of midnight, Metro Nashville went from 50 square miles to over 500. Basically the same people trying to support it, just didn't work that well. I don't know if you can see this or not. Take a look under the words Thompson Lane. Do you see residential rates $10 per year for fire service? So once Metro was formed, there were some problems because people didn't know, do I call Metro if I have a fire emergency? Do I call my Thompson Lane Fire Department? And true stories of some homes burning to the ground because the wrong service was called, or the wrong service didn't respond, or the right service didn't respond. This is a map that was in, I don't know if this came from the Tennessean, but this is a map of the Creve Hall area. Running vertically on that side of the wall, you'll see the words Timber Hill Drive. Across the top, you can see Elysian Fields Road. Just north of Elysian Fields Road now would be the Nashville Zoo. But basically, this article that showed up in the paper was identifying where there had been, I think the count was probably here, 25 different prowler complaints. So there was a prowler rapist basically terrorizing South Nashville. A lot of those incidents were happening in the Creve Hall area. This is Timber Hill Drive. The home is still there. I don't know if any of you are driving by. I did not put the street number in the book. I might get around to blurting it out later, but this retaining wall is still basically there. The home's still there. So these homes were sold in 1960 in that era. 1 acre lots, ranch style homes, $10,000 would get you all the above. A few days before the book was released in September of 2017, I had a friend who called me to say, you know, the house is up for sale, don't you? And I'm thinking, man, I'm so glad I didn't put that street number in there. Well, the house did sell. It sold on September 21st for $421,000. It had been renovated a few times, but it still looks like the house from the front. Paula's bedroom was the one on the other side, the far window over there. So Paula's mother came home that February night. If you read the book, you know she was out. The story goes, she's out dinner with friends. She comes home. She finds her daughter on the floor, badly beaten, shot multiple times. And then Alan Herring, this photograph closest to me, walks out of his bedroom and apparently has slept through his sister's sleigh. So this became pretty big news. Pretty big news meaning all across the South. The Associated Press picked it up. These are 3 newspaper headlines. The Banner, the Tennessee, and the Knoxville Journal, they all carried the story. And you know, it's one of those kind of urban tales you might think of, but it made big news. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to kind of give you the timeline. So you recognize the Boston Strangler, right? This is Albert DeSalvo, who I didn't know this until I started doing the research on the book. His timeline of terrorizing New England was a pretty good match to what was happening in Nashville with the Creve Hall Prowler, or the Prowler in South Nashville. And a lot of the police detectives thought what had happened to Paula Herring was that at some point this prowler was going to find someone who would put up a fight, and then someone would probably be killed. So about half of the investigators thought that's what had happened. A lot of people didn't know that much about the Herring family, but I'm actually fortunate to be here where the Herring family lived for a while. So you probably know more than most people do about the early origins. Paula's dad is in the photograph here. That's his Baylor University graduation attire. He served as a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army Air Forces he basically left Mexia, Texas, M-E-X-I-A. That's down here on this lower part, just east of Waco. Wilmer Herring graduated high school, and his soon-to-be wife, Eva Jo Ainsworth Herring, was 4 years younger. But they're both from the Mexia, Texas area. They left this part of the United States and they moved to Sumner County. Joe Herring became what I used to call the Nurse Peggy on the Andy Griffith Show, if you remember Nurse Peggy. Eva Jo Herring was the public health nurse, one of a few that was working in Sumner County at the time. They lived in Gallatin. Someone was kind enough to remind me that Paula, I think, attended the elementary school I got that right.
Venus Stewart.
Venus Stewart, thank you. I can never get it right. Thank you. Venus Stewart. She attended school there. And a couple of her classmates ended up meeting up with her again at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and they remembered each other from elementary school. So this is Paula looking really happy here in this outfit, not so happy. This is on her grandfather's farm near Mahia, Texas. Her mom and dad, of course. And this is Paula happier because she's barefooted. She's got 6 shooters on her side and a knife. That's her cousin and her grandfather, her father's father. The little boy on this side closest to me, that's not Alan Herring. That is one of Paula's cousins. This happens to be Paula Herring at a birthday party here in Gallatin. She was, I think at the time that this was taken, 11 years old. Anybody want to guess which one Paula is? Yep, she's closest to me right here. And this was taken, as far as we know, was taken here in Gallatin. That's Alan Herring in the arms of his dad. So this would have been roughly in that 1959-60 era. And part of the reason I'm showing these things is because a lot of these I could never get into the book. But something really bad happened in September of 1960. Paula's dad was found at the Knoll Hotel. And the medical examiner found in his room a bottle of rat poison. Key ingredient, arsenic, warfarin, however you want to pronounce the compound or choose the compound, it's all the same. And he was found at the Knoll Hotel. The Knoll Hotel, if you don't know, backs up to, or the back of it would be where you could enter Printer's Alley. And this hotel has been renovated. It's been redone. It's the same building, it's the same 12 stories, but it's beautiful inside. If you ever get a chance to go take a look, you should. Marble floors, I mean, it's just gorgeous inside. But the problem with that, so the little Herring family, they lose Wilmer Herring, Alan Herring is 2, and Paula turns her sadness, I guess anger, into athletic endeavors, and she turns out to be a really good athlete. She's the closest on this side, standing number 54, and she was captain of the girls' basketball team at Overton High School. This is Paula at the University of Tennessee. While she was there, she was only there briefly, she helped start the first snow skiing club in Knoxville, and they would go skiing at the little ski slope out in Gatlinburg. On the bottom photograph, on that side seated, come 3 people this way, that's Paula. And if it looks like she's kicking the guy in front of her, she may be, because that's the guy she was dating at the time she was killed. His name's Walter Pascal, real name. He was president of the snow skiing club once they got this going. So this is Paula in the dorm, and she wanted to be part of AOPI, that sorority. If you don't know this, you probably do. International headquarters for AOPI happens to be in Brentwood, Tennessee, in Maryland Farms. And the little poster up in the upper corner, that's an AOPI poster. I had to track down the name that's on there. It's Dottie Whalen. She's since deceased, but she was the girl assigned to be Paula's big sister in sorority, however the sorority process works. So the story took off. Again, every True Detective magazine of the era carried the Paula Herring story. And I don't know if you can read it, just based on how this is on the wall. Phantom Intruder slays Tennessee co-ed. That's supposed to be Paula getting ready to go out on a date, and on the front cover. Humpty Dumpty Murder on Timber Hill Drive. The connection there was All the King's Men, which was the paperback book that was missing. So All the King's Men, you know the rest of the rhyme. But every magazine I found in that era, they all covered this story. In part, they covered the story because a judge's son ends up being, brought in for questioning. But this really spawned the first urban legend for Metro's history, overtaken later, I think 11 years later, by the Marcia Trimble story. But early on, it was lock the doors, kids and babysitters, or you'll end up like Paula Herring. And parents were pretty serious about it. They, all the guns, locks, latches, routinely stayed sold out of the local hardware stores, especially during all this Grieve Hall prowler problem, and certainly so after Paula's murder. This happens to be jailhouse prisoners who were brought out to search for the missing paperback book. 2 things were missing from the house that night in Nashville. One of those turns out to be the gun. They never found the gun. And they did eventually find the paperback 25-cent copy of All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. So these guys are actually searching. If you know where Trousdale Drive is, there's a Creve Hall Church of Christ there on Trousdale Drive. So if you go around the corner to Blackman, that's where they are. This is before Interstate 65 was in place. So this is a 27-year-old man named Al Baker. Alan Baker liked to hang out in some of the local watering holes in Nashville, especially if there was beer or you could shoot pool. And part of the reason he's smiling is because he had been at a local watering hole called the Ruth's Diner on the Saturday night of February 22nd, and he had been there with a friend of his named John Randolph Clark, who looks like he's a lot older than his 39 years, but he's actually 39 years old. He's from East Tennessee, Jonesboro, Tennessee, where the National Storytelling Festival is held. He's from a prominent family. His dad was a judge. His dad was also a representative in the state legislature. And Clark apparently said to Baker that he had made a phone call out to the Timber Hill Drive home looking for Paula's mother. And then he apparently bragged to Baker that, well, the mom's not home yet, but I'll just go out there anyway and I'll see what happens and I'll wait for the mom to get home. This is actually inside the home. And what they found was a couple of bullets in the floor, didn't find the gun. This is a pretty well-known detective in Nashville lore, Tom Cathy. And he was one of the first detectives on this scene. And if you didn't know it, he was also the first detective on the scene of the Marsha Trimble case, when that story went from a missing person to, uh-oh, now we found her. So Tom Cathy was a part of the boat. So part of what Al Baker was telling one of his policeman friends was on the prior Christmas Eve, it had been snowing in Nashville. This is Christmas Eve 1963, so you're like 90 days prior, or not 90, is that 60? I can't do the math, I think it's 60. He remembered being out with John Randolph Clark, a couple other fellows. They were teasing Clark that the gun he carried had no real bullets in it, but Clark stepped out of the car, the sidewalk was covered with snow. He fired his pistol into the ground, puff of snow came up, and that was the end of the story. But what Baker remembered was where Clark had done that. So Baker's smiling because that's the reward money. And you know from the 1963 prices, that's a year and a half worth of dollars. That's big bucks. And Baker got the money because they do end up convicting John Randolph Clark for Paula's murder. These are the attorneys that, I think there's a photo of this in the book. So on my side is a man named Howard Butler. He's part of the Nashville Attorney General's office. On the far left is John Hollins Sr., who was part of the Nashville office. He's got the sunglasses, the cigar. In the middle, David Murray with the hat from Jackson, Tennessee, which is where they moved the trial. And then it's an optical illusion, but the short little fellow in the back is actually Whit LaFawn. That's Vice President Al Gore's uncle, who's part of the DA's office in Jackson, Tennessee. So the case moves from Nashville, goes to Jackson, 2 from Nashville, 2 from Jackson, help prosecute it. The man in the horn rim glasses is Charles Galbraith, and that's Clark, John Randolph Clark, staring pretty intently at him in this. On the far left, I believe that's the attorney that Clark's family provided as part of the defense for their family member. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask who's missing a white Ford Bronco. So you know the story, right? The white Ford Bronco. This is O.J. Simpson's story. So my question is, do you remember when the trial of O.J. Simpson, State versus O.J. Simpson, took place? It started in January of 1995. Do you know how long it ran? It ran until October. That's exactly right. It ran until October. So you'll know, my next question is, how long did the sensational trial of the South last with John Randolph Clark? And the answer is 5 days. Starts, finish, the judge gets up and says, I got 5 days. Friday around lunchtime, the jury gets the case. Friday around 5 p.m. on September 25th, the jury comes back with a verdict. They had to go get Charles Galbraith out of the, there was a pool hall pretty close to where the courthouse was, and he was in there drinking beer, shooting pool, thinking this is going to be a long weekend. And they got him out and said, no, there's a verdict waiting. So Clark ends up being convicted first-degree murder. He gets 30 years. Does anyone recognize the guy with the hat on the left? Lafayette Thomas, that's right, that's Fate Thomas. Fate Thomas, who went on later to become one of the sheriffs who ends up going to prison for, I guess, creative ways to spend the public's money. Leslie Jett, one of the other sheriffs, went to prison for the same thing. So this is where Clark ends up. This prison is where they filmed The Green Mile, Tom Hanks, some other folks fairly well known. They also filmed The Last Castle, I think that's the name of the movie, with Robert Redford. That was filmed here as well. It's certainly closed at this point. The Tennessee Department of Corrections uses part of this giant acreage for a lot of their administrative work. They house a lot of things out here, but you cannot get past the front gate. This turns out to be the commutation that Governor Ray Blanton, speaking of prison, that Governor Ray Blanton signed for John Randolph Clark, and it reduced the 30-year sentence down to 25. But in parole board math, Clark walked out after having served not a long time, and he didn't immediately go into prison anyway. He walked free for a couple of years, helped chaperone his wife's classes, teenage girls. He would go to Civitan meetings. He would offer continually, $5,000 cash to whoever killed Paul Herring because he claimed it wasn't him. So no one knows whether the Clark family paid Ray Blanton and his group $10,000 to get this signature. Don't have any way of knowing. I guess they could have. But Charles Galbraith was a pretty good advocate for his client, and whatever the case may be, Blanton signed it and Clark walked out. So in 1986, Clark does die of a heart attack, but in between the time he walked out and the heart attack, he actually worked as a Free Will Baptist minister. He would go in the winter time, and he would go to an RV park in Florida, and there he would be the chaplain of the RV park. And he was actually getting ready to go. He and his wife were getting ready to go to Florida on that very same wintertime tour. He was mowing his yard. The house was located on Thunderbird Drive, which is behind the Nashville West shopping district on the west. It's kind of the shopping district over there. He dropped out of a heart attack that day. His wife died a few years later. Both are buried in Smithville, Tennessee. So a lot of people thought that was the end of the terrible ordeal with Paul Herring. Thought that was the end of John Randolph Clark. A bad man goes to prison, he dies, who cares? But in August of 1997, so the 33 years means 33 years after the murder, a friend of mine asked me to meet him it was lunch at McCabe's Pub, an old restaurant place in Murphy Road near Vanderbilt West End. And this guy was a friend of mine I'd known for many years. He had a plan. He had like 43 different stories. He wanted to write 6-7 pages on each story. Wanted to write 6 or 7 pages on each story, thinking there might be enough of these semi-interesting stories that Nashvilleians would have an interest in, and he wanted me to help him do the research. I'm not a Nashville native, and I was happy to help do the research. But I also started realizing this is a lot of morbid stories. I mean, there's some bad stuff here. And do you really want to drag these families back through these stories just so you can? So I thought, So those 42, if anybody wants the other 42 stories, got them. I got a folder full of them. I'm kidding about do you want them. Some of them have been covered by other writers in town, but basically I was thinking, and I said to him, unless there's something that we can do to help, or there's some new ending or something, some update, I don't think this is what I want to do. But part of his story project was, this is the infamous Nashville train wreck. Last summer was the 100-year anniversary of the worst railroad incident in the United States. Over 100 people killed, a couple of hundred people injured. If you don't know this about this incident, part of the problem was the cars were all made out of wood. And so this incident actually spawned the development of steel cars made out of steel. So that was one of the stories. And my friend, when I asked him, where do you go to learn about these different stories, he said, well, I don't know, but there's a Metro Archives. If you remember the name Richard Fulton, Mayor Dick Fulton, Dick Fulton had the foresight to help get funding to house, thousands, tens of thousands of artifacts in Metro Nashville, Davidson County, and they're housed in different repositories around the city. But in this case, this friend said, there's one of these out on Elm Hill Pike, just go out there and see what happens. So I did. I went out, told them that I don't know what I'm looking for, but I would like to learn more about maybe some of Nashville's history in Metro. And the woman I talked to said, we just got Hubert Kemp's records. The police archive sends over records to us every 35 years, and we just got Kemp's. We haven't looked at his, but would you like to look at them? Sure, why would you let me? But sure, I'll look at them. So this is actually a recreation of where I was in the archives. The boxes looked like this. I was a lot prettier 20 years ago, but anyway. This was filmed by Channel 5 after the book came out. They wanted to go and kind of run a little film clip there. So I actually got permission to go back. There were no workers there. It's basically just an empty, not empty, but not staffed repository. So as part of that adventure, again, this is August 1997, I stumbled upon a file, and the file was unlike nothing else that was in these boxes. It was all records, reports, attendance records, letters between heads of government that Chief Kemp had written back and forth to other council members, but out of that came a manila folder, and inside that folder was very stark images, photographs, 8.5 by 11 black and white photographs of what had happened in Creve Hall at 4815 Timber Hill Drive. I need to tell you, 4815 Timber Hill Drive. This was one of the things that was in the file. If you can look at the bottom, this is a telegram, and it says Hoover. That's J. Edgar Hoover's telegram. This one came back to Harry Nickel. So Harry Nickel was the District Attorney General for the Nashville District at the time of the Paula Herring murder. This is signed J. Edgar Hoover again, but this one is going to Chief Kemp. And this is all about, we got the evidence, we're going to help, we'll see what we can do. This is actually a handwritten letter from Eva Jo Herring. And the A, I don't know if you can see the A down there, that's A for Ainsworth, that was her maiden name. Eva Jo A. Herring. And this is a letter basically telling Hubert Kemp what a great job everyone did to put away that bad man, John Randolph Clark. This turns out to be a letter from Clifton Beverly Briley. And this is a letter from the mayor saying that he was in the area the night of the murder, meaning in Creve Hall at the time of the murder. So I'm looking at this file, seeing these things, thinking, this is really unusual. I don't know what this means, but this is really unusual. So I made a trip to Sumner County. I started looking for the newspaper articles. I started looking for where's Paula buried, because there was a photograph on a cold February day with Paula's mother in dark sunglasses, and it was taken at the, I gotta get the name right, Crestview Memory Garden, Memorial Garden, so you know where it is, that's where it is. And I thought, there's something missing here, and I couldn't find the grave, but you can see it's the headstone that's missing. But here's the foot marker at the bottom, and the foot marker looks like this. So I went back to the office and said to the guy who had helped me locate Paula's remains, why no marker? And he said, well, sometimes people don't buy them, so we put the foot marker down. Like, okay. And he starts looking a few moments more, and he says to me, we'd like to buy that plot back from you, the other plot. Like, what are you talking about? Well, her mom bought 2 plots at the same time, paid $90 cash for each. I said, so who's in the second plot? Well, no one, it's empty, we'd like to buy it back. Aren't you family? I said, no. So, but I said, I know some family, so I'll contact the family. And I knew I had already had a conversation, a brief one with Alan Herring, so I knew who to call to say, if somebody wants to buy a plot back. So I did. I tracked down Alan. And he had two questions for me, and I had a question for Alan. It's all too obvious that you'll know what my question was. But these were Alan's two questions, and the one I had for him was, what do you remember about the night of your sister's murder? And the answer was, lost it. Lost that weekend, don't have it in my conscious memory. I just don't know anything about it. And so it made sense. Those were his two questions. So that actually began the journey of how the book, the research that started in August of 1997, it went on 15 years to 2012, off and on. I'm not that slow a researcher, I just had other things to do, like work for a living. So 15 years of research, 3 years of writing the story, 2 years of getting through the literary agent, New York publishing house process until the book was released in August of 2017. So August or September. So August to September, 20 years in a month.